Coping Skills here, back with another reaction. Today, first time reacting to Sabaton. Now it's kind of turned on to Sabaton because I do a new artist poll on my community tab on my channel, and Sabaton won. I think it has something to do with me doing some Nightwish reactions recently, and Florianson's husband apparently is the drummer of Sabaton. So that's pretty cool. I was told that a lot of their songs are kind of historical in nature, talking about actual battles. So there's some kind of non-fiction elements to their songs about famous things from military history, I guess maybe is a good way to put it. That's pretty much all I know. I was recommended several actually, to maybe start with, but I decided to go with To Hell and Back. And the reason To Hell and Back is because apparently this one brings quite a bit of mental health relevancy. And if you didn't know and you're new to the channel, I'm a licensed mental health counselor in Florida. Started doing reaction videos to try to raise mental health awareness. At least that's the goal. So try to use my 15 plus years of experience as a counselor to provide some perspective or some insight, things pertaining to mental health in the songs that I react to. If you appreciate that, if you like the content, please consider subscribing, maybe hitting that like button, leaving a comment, goes a long way. Also, wanted to mention that this song, I did a little bit of research with it, so I'm planning to do something a little bit different. I apologize if this song is maybe a little bit longer, but apparently this song is about an old Hollywood actor who was also the most decorated veteran from World War II. And he went on to make like 40 Hollywood films. So yeah, we'll get into who that is and what happened, and I'm going So this song is about a gentleman named Audie Murphy who did a hell of a job in World War II, survived traumatic experiences, but unfortunately came back with some post-traumatic stress. And at the time, I think it was referred to as battle fatigue, is what they called it, or shell shock, until it was kind of formally understood a little bit better and became post-traumatic stress disorder that we know today, PTSD. And he kind of brought a lot of limelight to it because he went on to become a very famous actor, but was also the most decorated veteran in World War II. So really cool story about him, and I'm wondering how Sabaton tells the story. But I did find an article that I'm going to interject into the song. I'm just going to react to it, but I'm going to interject me reading this article throughout the song. At least that's what I'm going to attempt to do. So hopefully it works out well and plays with the song well. But I haven't heard the song, so it's a little bit of guesswork. But this article is from August 29th, 1971 in the San Antonio newspaper Express News, right? And it was written by a gentleman named Bill Libby. There will be a link to this article in the description of the video. So if you're interested in reading it in its entirety, sat down with him and talked to him 25 years after the war to get his thoughts on what has gone on, what he went through, and what he was going through at the time. And it's very insightful. Let's do it. In World War II, millions of soldiers went into battle, far away from their homes, and many of those who returned faced an enemy just as formidable as the forces they fought on the battlefield. Post traumatic stress disorder, was usually treated with quite ineffective yet highly addictive drugs. One of the men facing the horrors of World War II, long after the war ended, was First Lieutenant Audie Murphy from Kingston, Texas.
From Texas, a man of the wild, thrown into combat where bodies lie piled. Hides his emotions, his blood's running cold. Just like his victories, his story unfolds. Light, our white light, if there be any glory in war, let it rest on them like hell.
Yeah, I mean, just reacting to the video, I dig the visuals, right? Cutting to him in Hollywood, now cutting to him obviously dealing with his PTSD symptoms in his room by himself, with the kind of shadows crouching in and everything. Very cool. But yeah, I wanted to comment on the music as well. That's really cool. I like the flute at the beginning. They're bringing in a little bit of melodic stuff to their more rock metal vibe, but it's a real kind of simple gallop beat. But I really like the intonation, the kind of the grit texture of the singer's voice. I don't know his name. Let me know in the comments below. He's got an interesting accent. I'm not sure exactly where he's from. If I had to guess, somewhere around Finland, or maybe he's Dutch. I don't know. Let me know in the comments. But I'm really enjoying it. I like the beat. I like the feel of it. It really it's musically takes you into a little bit of a war, a cinematic experience. So that's cool. Yeah, I'm gonna rewind it a little bit and we'll keep going. Where I've been was bad, but I wonder sometimes if where I'm heading isn't worse. He said, I've never found a place for myself. I'm here because it's where I have something I can do, but I don't do it well. The only thing I've ever found I was any good at was war, which is a terrible thing. He shook his head at the thought, depressed by it. He said, I used to think there could be nothing worse than war, than killing and maybe being killed and seeing your buddies killed. But in a way, that was simple compared to life here in Hollywood. There, everyone understood the rules. You either killed or got killed. Here, the rules are much more complicated. A person gets mixed up in contracts and talent and no talent and big egos and phonies, and it's hard to live, let alone have a decent marriage and raise a decent family. I found there is nothing worse than owing people money and having them come after you about it all the time and not knowing how to make it and pay it back. Living like this is as bad as dying on a battlefield. After a while, you kid yourself that it's not real. But then you're losing your self-respect. Well, I'll tell you, I don't want that to happen. I'm strong. I'm too tough for this tough. I won't let it break my heart. I won't let it break me. I'll fight it to the finish. He smiled a little, then shrugged and added, I just wish it was a fight I knew how to fight. right. Man, I like the little guitar solo there. Very cool. One of the things that I did learn about um, this gentleman, Audie Murphy, right, is that back then they used a few different medications to help with PTSD symptoms, and one of those medications was really to help people sleep, because if you have PTSD, sleeping can be really challenging, right? And this medication is a little bit like a benzo, like Xanax, but a little bit like a couple of other drugs. I think it was called Placid, the one that he was prescribed, but it was very addictive, addicted very quickly, and because its effectiveness and the side effects in the United States, it's no longer available and hasn't been available for a while. But it still is available in other countries, and it's still prescribed. It still has some use case, right? But yeah, with him, he became very addicted to the pills, and I saw them kind of depict the pills there, and also depict kind of those tendencies for self-harm when he was putting the gun in his mouth. So yeah, all of those things are super rare, or super common. Sorry, not super rare, with veterans, unfortunately. Even today, a lot of veterans take their own lives. And I'm not sure exactly, maybe we'll get to some information about that, but I'm not sure exactly how long Audie Murphy was over there in World War II. But yeah, he was quite the decorated soldier. But yeah, let's get back to World War II. Came along when he was 17. Then he had the war to do. He had often hunted for his food, and like many farm boys, he was good with a gun, and he was stirred by patriotism. He tried to enlist in the Marines and in the paratroops, but he was rejected because he was too small and underweight. Finally, he got into the Army, but after basic training, he was made a clerk in a post exchange. He kept after his superiors until he got what he wanted: assignment to combat duty with the infantry. He was sent to combat in North Africa and wound up fighting on beaches of Italy and France, and in the invasion of Germany. At first, his fellows laughed at him because he looked too young and frail to wage war and endure its hardships. Their teasing tormented him. At first, he found he was afraid. He remembered vomiting in the dirt in the rain. He remembered clearly the first deaths he saw. One minute, a man is sitting on a grassy slope talking about his family back home. In the distance, a gun slams, and in the next minute, the man is dead. He saw many die. He remembers men with their faces blown away or half their bodies blasted off of them. He said, "You never forget these things. They etch themselves in your brain, and you keep seeing them in your mind. And you try to put them aside, but they're always there. You're thinking of something else, and the horror comes back to you." It disgusted him and drove him to the deeds of death of his own. At first, you're forced to fight because you have to, and you're being pushed and don't want to be considered a coward. But then you want to, because you want to kill those who are killing you. You want to save yourself and get even, but there's nothing else to do there but that, because killing and getting even, dying, loses its meaning in a place where there is so much killing and dying all the time. He said years later in that office of despair, he told this writer of fighting in scorching heat, sweaty and dirty, and in bitter cold, freezing and numb. Once, when a buddy was killed, he angrily moved out alone into the open, with a machine gun on one hip, and crossed a field mowing down Germans. Somehow, he was not hit. Another time, he jumped onto an abandoned tank, turned a machine gun on the enemy, and single-handedly staved off a Nazi force of 250 men and 6 tanks. The tank was hit 3 times, and he was blown off, but not hurt.
Haunting my dreams that still there when I
For a long time, he felt proud of himself. He felt like some noble killer. He described a rifle on his lap as beautiful as a flower and more to be trusted than your best friend. For a long time, he just accepted what he was supposed to do. And he did it. I always said you had to be young and ignorant to be a good foot soldier. I was both. He said in our conversation years later, "It helps if you think you're doing right." I thought so then. I'm not so sure now, in view of the fact that we've had so many wars and so much killing since. I'm not sure if it was ever right. Even by the end of my war, I wasn't so sure. When we heard there was going to be peace, I stopped killing. I was supposed to go on. We were still fighting, but I began to miss my desire had worn away. The heart for it had gone out of me. He is credited with having killed more than 100 men, having captured more than 100, and having wounded close to 500. In that later time, he shrugged and said, "I don't know how they know. Maybe the War Department kept some count somehow. Maybe the officers sent in totals. I didn't keep count. I didn't know how many. I don't want to know." For this, he won promotion from private to lieutenant in the field and was awarded, among others, the Congressional Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Silver Service Cross, the Legion of Merit, 3 Purple Hearts, 2 Silver Stars, and a Bronze Star, more medals than any other soldier in World War II. He said, "Many never got medals they deserved. Many heroes were gotten as they lay dead in the field." When the war ended, this tiny, simple, shy Southwesterner was celebrated. He was the small town boy who had made good. He didn't even know he was the most decorated hero of the war until he returned home. Not yet 21 and old enough to vote, he was told so at a victory banquet. Parades and receptions were staged in his honor. Famous men shook his hand, and women, like the kind he'd dreamed boyish fantasies about at the front, pursued him. A publisher paid him to do his book, and Life portrayed him on its cover. James Cagney studied the picture and read the story and suggested he come to Hollywood. I had nothing better to do, so I did. Quite some time after the war, Audie locked himself into a motel room for 7 days to get rid of his addiction to the drugs, and was finally able to return to normal life. Lieutenant Murphy received every military combat award for valor available from the U.S. Army. The Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, Legion of Merit, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Good Conduct, Presidential Unit Citation, American Campaign, European, African, Middle Eastern Campaign, World War II Victory, Army of Occupation, Legion of Honor, Chevalier, French Croix de Guerre, Belgian Croix de Guerre, Combat Infantryman Badge, Marksman Badge, Expert Badge, Outstanding Civilian Service Medal, Texas Legislative Medal of Honor. In memory of Audie Murphy, 1925 to 1971. Yeah, definitely a true hero. And this article that I found came out in 1971, following Audie Murphy's passing. He hung his head a moment, his eyes averted, and he smiled and looked up and said, "My sons are Terry and James, and they're good boys, and I'm deeply proud of them, and I've tried to be a good father to them. I care, you see. Terry has acted some, and he sings and plays the guitar, but he's not sure what he wants to be. Jim isn't sure what he wants to be. They're getting near draft age, and one thing I don't want them to be is soldiers. I'm something of a super patriot. But these aren't real wars we're fighting these days. Except the boys are really being killed. These wars are morally wrong. It's not right to ask young men to risk their lives in wars they can't win. Anyway, war is a nasty business, to be avoided if possible, and to be gotten over with as soon as possible. It's not the sort of job that a man should get a medal for. I'll tell you what bothers me. What if my sons try to live up to my image? What if people expect it of them?" His voice grew soft and sad. "I've talked to them about it. I want them to be whatever they are. I don't want them to try to be what I was. I don't want dead heroes for sons." He was silent a few seconds, then said, "Anyway, God willing, they're about ready to lead their own life. During the war, the medics hooked me on pills. Remembering the war, I needed sleeping pills. For years, I couldn't sleep. Finally, I just threw away the pills. I pulled the monkey off my back and kicked the habit. Now I find I can sleep again. Now I want to begin sleeping in a decent bed again. I want to move out. I've been living this strange life, like a watchman, for a long time. But my boys don't need a watchman much longer. But on Memorial Day weekend, in a thunderstorm, the plane carrying 6 missed Martinsville and flew into the side of Birch Mountain in a fiery crash. Searchers picked up the remains out of the rugged woods and the charred wreckage and struggled up dirt roads with the bodies. Because Audie Murphy was one of those bodies. He was less than 1 month from his 47th birthday, and more than 25 years from his greatest triumphs. War didn't kill him, peace did. His body was flown back to Los Angeles, where funeral rites were conducted at the Church of the Hills at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Hollywood. He was eulogized as a quiet, unassuming, soft-spoken man. More than 800 listened. Many more who could not get into the chapel stood outside, on the hills and terraces. But the only Hollywood personality noticed was Murphy's ex-wife, Wanda Hendricks, who emerged weeping and said he was a great soldier. No one can ever take that away from him. His body was flown to Washington, D.C. The U.S. Army band played, and a horse-drawn caisson carried him to his burial place in Arlington National Cemetery, in the shade of a black oak tree, near other former servicemen, nearly 250 other Medal of Honor winners, near the tomb of the unknowns. Many of his former wartime buddies were there, reminiscing about his remarkable battle deeds. His former commanding officer, retired Colonel Kenneth Parter, was there. He said, "You can just say he was the best soldier there ever was." When the casket was lowered into the ground, and the flag which had draped it was folded and presented to his wife, she held it in the front of her proudly. She and her sons held their heads up proudly. The last words this writer heard Audie Murphy speak were as follows: "In the war, we forgot how to live. Since the war, all these years in Hollywood, I've never lived an unreal life. The war and the movies gave me a great deal, but they also took a great deal from me." The tense little man shook his head and said, "I've had tough times, but I found out I wasn't afraid of dying, so why should I be afraid of living? I don't know how to be scared. Do you know that? Since the war, nothing scares me, and nothing excites me. What is there in life that compares to a battle for excitement? What does money mean when a guy who can't act makes $100,000 a film? Hell, someone could throw $1 million in my lap today and I'd say, what the hell is this for?" His boyish face broke into a grin and he said, "Well, it was good for me being hurt. It rekindled my spirit. It made me want to fight back. It made me want to begin living again," he said. But on another note, I also wanted to mention that this topic is personal to me as well, because I didn't serve in the military, but my wife did. My wife is a veteran, and she's a woman who, among very few, have served in a combat area. She was stationed in Mogadishu during the Somali incursion that we know now as Black Hawk Down. Fortunately for her, it wasn't quite as bad as what those people went through. She worked in communications. All the people in Black Hawk Down stayed in the Air Force base that was close to the water. But the U.S. Military and UN forces had another base that was kind of on the other side of Mogadishu, where they didn't have any of those combat outings into, right? They didn't have any like missions. I know the other side had the Rangers and Delta Force and different things going in and trying to do tactical missions and whatnot. The other side, the other base, was really more of that humanitarian effort that was also going on at the same time. And they didn't cross over paths, so they were kind of separated. So my wife was part of the other group, but still traversed that same town in Mogadishu and got a lot of the same hate that Americans were getting from from the local people. And she was actually there for all 3 tours that were there. So she was there for about 18 months. She got there shortly after it started and was in the last group to leave. And she saw quite a few things and came back home with some PTSD. This was before I met her. So what she's been through is definitely sleep issues. Had a hard time dealing with fireworks. She doesn't anymore. We've processed through a lot of those things, but there are still some triggers and things that are will set her off. So during my counseling, right, I did kind of a deep dive in trying to understand trauma, right? Trying to understand what it does to the brain, specifically for combat veterans. I wanted to understand what they're going through, so if they ever were across from me seeking help, I'd be best capable of helping them. One thing I like to do on this channel, and I've done it a couple times, I actually did it pretty recently, but I like to explain a little bit about what PTSD actually is, what psychological trauma is. We throw around the word trauma all the time. Oh, it was traumatic for me, it was this or that, but psychological trauma is a little bit different. It's a weighted word, and it means something very specific. The brain is full of a whole bunch of different parts, but the basic brain chemistry is we have 2 hemispheres of the brain, right brain, left brain, and one part of that brain is good for more analytical things like math and science, and the other side is more creative and verbal expression and those things. And we take in all these things and we process what we experience, and then those 2 hemispheres send that information to the corpus callosum, which is like a pile of nerves that is over in the middle of the brain, gathers information from both sides. So it's connected to both hemispheres of the brain, the corpus callosum. The hippocampus is also kind of a center brain thing, and that is more like the mailroom or the mail center of the brain, where it takes in all those signals and it parses them out and understands, and it stores and builds long-term memory. So a normal functioning experience is you take it in, you remember the things that you did, you saw, you smelt, you heard, it processes through the corpus callosum into the hippocampus, and it turns into long-term memory, and then you can reference those things properly. What happens with trauma? Well, psychological trauma, especially related to PTSD, is we have another part of our brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is like the alarm center of our brain. It's the thing that's responsible for anxiety and fear and being heightened in dangerous situations, right? So it's a very important thing. It's a very primal part of the brain, but it doesn't need as much information in it to do its job. Really what its job is to do is just let you know, hey, danger, danger, Will Robinson, right? What I like to say is that when psychological trauma happens, the amygdala inflames, and it kind of grabs all of the experiences before they've gotten to the hippocampus and can be understood and processed correctly, because it wants to let you know to react to danger as quick as possible. Sometimes that experience kind of gets stuck in the amygdala as like a low resolution image. So it's not perfectly clear, because like if your brain wants to warn you that a knife is dangerous, it doesn't necessarily want you to only see the knife that you found out was dangerous, like a ginsu, right? It also wants you to see a steak knife or a paring knife. In fact, kind of any sharp edge as dangerous to be on the lookout. So it doesn't want high resolution images. It's more broad. So if we experience something and our amygdala is so on fire because it's such a difficult circumstance, could be any type of possible trauma, war is a big one, combat is a big one, abuse is a big one, right? So there's a lot of different things that can trigger that, but basically what happens is your memory kind of gets stuck in the amygdala in a low-res image, and doesn't get processed properly into the hippocampus. So part of what treatment is for PTSD is trying to, what I call, tickle the amygdala so that it starts to get inflamed just a little bit, and it kind of loosens up that memory, and then you use talk therapy to talk through the experiences that you went through, and then it starts to loosen and starts to kind of get out of the amygdala and get stored into the hippocampus and converted to a long-term memory. And that's why people have repressed memories and they process these things. They're like, oh my gosh, I didn't remember all of these things because it was stuck in the amygdala, and then all of a sudden it gets processed into the hippocampus, and then it's a good long-term memory. And that's also why things can trigger people that are kind of similar, right? Like I said, my wife had issues with fireworks. Well, it's not gunfire, but it's a loud bang, right? So the amygdala doesn't know the difference. So it can kind of trigger her PTSD traits, right? All that to say is that there are treatment options out there. There's a fairly new, last 20 years or so, approach called EMDR treatment, which is basically you process the information, the experiences in talk therapy while you're staring at some lights that kind of make your eyes move in certain patterns that is disorienting just enough to kind of tickle that amygdala kind of scientifically while you're doing it. Because one of the dangers with trauma is if you kind of go in there guns blazing and you start talking and you try to force those things up, your amygdala can go off too much, and it feels like you're in danger again, and kind of push those low res images even down further deep, right? And we call that being re-traumatized. So it's something that you have to typically see a professional about, or if you understand it better, you can do that yourself. So if you're in a situation where you have PTSD and you've been kind of stuck for a while, hopefully that might help you understand what actually needs to be done in order to help, in order to process, in order to grow and lessen your PTSD symptoms. And a lot of times medication can be used to help kind of calm that amygdala, but it's still stored in there, right? So those are only patchwork things. In order to get real progress, real healing, you have to do that work. You have to tickle that amygdala, let those things out, process them, and it doesn't happen just the first time. You got to do it quite often. It's different for everybody. But in any case, that's my long diatribe about PTSD and psychological trauma. I hope you found it helpful. There are several different theories about what exactly happens during psychological trauma. That is the theory I pertain to in my research during my graduate program. That's the one that made the most sense and had the most scientific evidence that I found. In any case, thank you for watching. I really appreciate you sticking through this with me. I hope you enjoyed the reaction. Click on something here. Until the next time, we'll see you later.